Hello everyone, my name is Meridian and welcome to my channel. I post DIY, alt fashion, and cosplay videos with little blips about life and mental health. Today's video will showcase the DIYs I made as Christmas gifts. The first part will be a hoodie inspired by an obscure panel of Mitaka from the Chainsaw Man manga. Don't worry, no spoilers here. Links to all the supplies used will be in the description as always. This was part of a Secret Santa gift exchange with my group of friends, and we used Elfster to post what we potentially wanted to receive. My friend had requested a few different Redbubble artworks, so I bought one from the website and the second one I'm making. That way he can get 2 gifts from the list and I can still keep it under the set budget for the exchange. This one was simple enough to get stock graphics to modify. I have a subscription to Envato Marketplace, not sponsored, and I was able to download the cake graphic, a fun font, and some extra dots to make the floating frosting detail. I'm editing using Adobe Illustrator, again not sponsored, to make a custom graphic from the stock elements that I downloaded. Not sure if anyone wants tutorials specifically on how to use Adobe Illustrator, but let me know. I'm just speeding through this part to showcase the DIYs for the rest of the video. After the graphic is complete, I print it out on inkjet compatible heat transfer paper. I am using for dark fabrics paper, so it has a white backing instead of clear. I prepare the print on a cutting board for my Cricut machine to cut out, also not sponsored. As with all DIYs, it's not always a straight shot. I accidentally set the cut pressure too high and the blade cut through the backing. Also, I completely forgot I ran out of transfer film, so I had to peel and hand place all of the floating cream dots individually. I'm using sublimation tape or heat-resistant tape to hold down the individual dots in place so the graphic doesn't move around. I place a parchment paper to protect the graphic and then heat press it at 305 degrees Fahrenheit for 15 seconds. Then I remove the sublimation tape and repress it at the same settings to make sure it's solid. Using a gift bag from the thrift store, I package up this gift and it's time to move on to the next DIY. This DIY is part of the Secret Santa gift exchange with my step-siblings and cousins. I will be thrift flipping this bow skirt into a bag, basing my inspiration on this bow bag from Lolita Inside. I'll be using some nylon backpack straps, lobster buckles, grommets, and black non-stretch crepe fabric. These supplies are all things I already have in my hoarded craft stash, so that helped me stay under budget as well. I'm preparing the skirt for lining by seam ripping a few areas where the waistband facing is tacked to the side seams and the darts, then measuring and cutting an appropriate amount of fabric. After using my serger to overlock the lining fabric and tucking the excess thread in, I take the long fabric and sew down the 2 short sides together, leaving about 4 to 5 inches open on one side. I'll show more later about why. Then, I move the seam from the side to the middle and sew the bottom seam closed. The 4 to 5 inch vent shown here will match up with the zipper. I open the skirt's back zipper and match up my lining fabric to the waist. The vertical seam with the vent matches up with the back zipper seam of the skirt. Then I sew the lining to the waistband facing. After turning it right side out, I will tuck in the bottom skirt hem to sew it closed. This video is mainly a DIY compilation overview for my recent Christmas gifts. I didn't do an in-depth explanation of how to exactly place the lining and vent when sewing, so if anyone would be interested in a dedicated lining video, let me know. To prepare the bag for a strap, I am using some snippets of backpack strap material to reinforce my grommets. I punch the grommet shape into the strap and manually cut them out since the strap is too thick for the punch to fully cut through. Then I burn the circle to seal any fraying. On the bag, I mark out where I want to put the grommets and then use the punch and scissors to cut the holes. I place the backpack straps with holes in between the facing and the skirt shell to reinforce the fabric. Then place the front and back grommet pieces together and press. For the strap, here's the reference again. I wanted to make a ruched strap like this one, but it didn't turn out the way I wanted because I cut the fabric too thin. After cutting, I sewed the right sides together down the length. In the end, I had to use the lining fabric for the strap as well because the faux leather from my stash is pretty old, so it was peeling when I was trying to turn it right side out. Off camera, I cut out the crepe fabric and sewed down the lengths same as the faux leather, then used my serger to overlock the insides of the crepe fabric strap. I turned the strap right side out and pulled the backpack strap through the strap fabric with a giant safety pin. You can see here that adjusting the ruffles is too tight on the backpack strap, so next time I should use either a thinner backpack strap inside or make a wider fabric strap to get that voluminous ruched look from the inspo pic. To attach the lobster clasps, I fold the strap in half and loop it through, then sew it down with a zigzag stitch. I then try to even out the ruffles across the strap and then sew down the center length to keep the ruffles from moving around. And that's the finished bow bag. Here's some close-up of the details. The Secret Santa exchange with my family was a traditional paper list exchange, and the prompt I got was aesthetic tote bag and tumbler. I'm not too familiar with the personalities and preferences of my cousins and siblings from my stepmom's side yet, so I just took a shot in the dark and I hope she liked this bag that I'm making. Along with the bag, I'm packing a tumbler. I know my cousin likes anime, but I wasn't sure which titles, so I hope she liked this one. For the last DIY, I'm upcycling a thrifted bag and skirt into a Kingdom Hearts Ita bag. The only thing I had to purchase for this was clear vinyl. Instead of buying new vinyl, I thrifted a clear bag from Goodwill. Everything else used in this DIY are supplies I already had. I started with seam ripping the bag apart and removing all the threads. To remove the wrinkles without damaging the vinyl, I used a steamer. I wasn't sure if it would work, but Google Gemini recommended it over an iron. I think it did a great job at releasing the creases, and there was no shrinking or warping to the vinyl at all. I pack away the leftover vinyl for a future project and keep the single panel I need for the Ita bag window. For the size of the bag, I want to use the plaid fabric from this skirt I thrifted a while back. The brand is Cherokee from the Target Kids section. There's a bleach stain on it, so I tend not to wear it anymore, but I love the plaid pattern still. I'm seam ripping the skirt to use the fabric and ironing it out. I will only need a portion of this for the tote bag. The leftover fabric will be saved for another project. After thinking through what other materials to use, I ended up using the same black crepe fabric I used with the bow tote bag. To give the tote bag more structure, I will be putting foam padding between 2 layers of the fabric, bonded together with double-sided fusible interfacing. I prepare 4 panels for the back, front, Ita pocket, and pin insert. While I prepared the 4 padded fabric panels, I wanted to ask how your holiday was. For several years, I had a bad relationship with the holiday season and often felt sour about not accomplishing enough during the year. Catching up with extended family was the last thing I wanted to do while feeling this way. But in 2024, it was a really good year for me, in that it lined up with more availability with my friend group. We hung out throughout the year, and coming into the holiday season, we did the Secret Santa gift exchange. I created a lot of good memories with them, and it made coming into the holiday season so much more joyful, and I'm super grateful. This DIY is part of the Secret Santa gift exchange with my friend group. She posted a note that anything Kingdom Hearts, Tangled, Berserk, Zelda, or Guilty Crown would make her happy. She also had a tote bag in her wish list, and I know she's an avid pin collector. So I thought a handmade KH Ita tote bag would fit the bill. For the front panel, I draw out some lines to figure out the placement of the vinyl, and some extra lines to account for seam allowance. I also decided on how much of the top part I wanted to have the icon pattern and marked it. This part actually confused me a lot, and I had to think a long time before cutting out the centerpiece. After cutting, I sew the bottom 3 sides of the vinyl to the padded fabric. The top is excess and will overflow towards the top. Thankfully, this turned out correctly and I didn't have to redo it. I snipped the upper corners of the padded fabric where the seam allowance is behind the vinyl. Then I cut the excess seam allowance of the padded fabric, so the total seam allowance left is 1/4 of an inch. In the bottom 2 rounded corners of the Ita window, I snipped the seam allowance to release the puckering. To hide the seam allowance behind the Ita window, I use 1/2 inch double fold black bias tape. I insert the seam allowance between the bias tape and sew together. Then I fold the bias tape against the padded fabric away from the vinyl so it's hidden and top stitch it down. I then used a wet cloth to remove the fabric chalk lines. I forgot to iron it after that, but that would have gotten rid of the chalk lines completely if I did. Next, I overlocked the edges of my front and back panel at my serger and tacked the excess threads as always. Back to the plaid fabric, I measure out half of what I need and cut the long side in half to make the total length. I add an extra inch for seam allowance. I overlock 2 short sides of the fabric, sew the overlock sides together, then overlock the total perimeter, and tack the excess threads as always. I finish the seam off with a top stitch for a professional look. Next, I've used some of the black crepe fabric together to thicken and stabilize it, but I skipped the foam padding on this part. To make the Kingdom Hearts pattern on it, I start with some shareable patterns I found posted by an artist on Reddit. I'll leave the link in the description, of course. To make sure that the Cricut cuts are clean, I trace out the icons in vector format in Adobe Illustrator. I get picky about icon symmetry, so I use a lot of guides and the reflect tool when I draw them out. While I'm drawing out the rest of the icons, I wanted to touch back on the topic of holidays. It wasn't just the end of year holiday season I had a bad relationship with. I had developed an entire aversion to celebrating any holiday, including my birthday and my anniversary. I always felt the need to work and work and work because I never felt accomplished, and the turn of each year made the weight of this feeling so heavy. Working to turn this mindset around was a lot of effort, and I hope to share this journey more on another video. For now, I'll get back to the Ita bag. I then space out the icons with some cursed fraction math, and then prepare the vector file in Mirror for cutting. For the pattern itself, I'm using a shimmer gray heat transfer vinyl. I cut out the size needed and place it on a Cricut cutting board. After the Cricut does its magic, I weed the excess vinyl from the artwork. For the backside of the bag, I'm doing a single large crown icon. When both vinyls are ready, I heat press them onto the prepared fabric and back panel at 305 degrees Fahrenheit for 15 seconds. After removing the transfer film, I press them again at the same settings. Next, I trim the icon pattern fabric to the exact size for the top side of the bag. And overlock the edges to prevent fraying. Before sewing that pattern on, I trim the excess vinyl and use a 5/8 inch black satin ribbon to cover the top back seam of the Ita bag window. Then I place the pattern fabric face down, sew it to the front of the panel, then fold it up, and top stitch the seam. To sew the sides in, I pin the center of the plaid fabric to the center bottom of the front panel. Then I pin outwards from there. Then I sew it together with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I repeat the same method for the back panel. For the Ita bag pocket panel, I want the width from left to right to be exactly the same as the front panel, but the height should be shorter to avoid the top hem of the bag later. After cutting to size and overlocking the Ita pocket panel, I pin it to the front panel. It is about 1/2 inch from the bottom and 2 inches from the top. I sew the left and right sides of the Ita pocket to the front panel. I leave the bottom without a seam. The plaid fabric was a bit too long, but better to be too long than too short. I cut the excess and overlock the top. After turning the bag right side out, I was excited at finally seeing it come together. When starting off, it was an easy project in my head, but actually going through it was more challenging than originally anticipated. To finish the top hem of the bag, I will be using 1-inch single-fold black bias tape. I measure out how much I need, then cut and overlock the raw edges. For the strap attachments, I'm using some nylon backpack straps and metal triangle rings. Looping the strap through the ring, I pin them to both sides of the bag. With the right sides facing, I sew the bias tape to the top of the bag with the backpack strap sandwiched in between at the sides. I then fold over the bias tape towards the inside of the bag and top stitch the top and bottom of the bias tape. This finishes the top hem of the bag while sewing in the strap rings at the same time. For the strap, I had a pre-made adjustable backpack strap with lobster clasps, probably from another bag I thrifted a long time ago. Unfortunately, the lobster clasps that it came with are too small for the triangle rings I used. But fortunately, I had some other lobster clasps that do fit. So I seam rip the strap, swap out the lobster clasps, and sew. Almost to the finish line. The last part is to make the Ita pinboard insert. The final fabric pad I cut smaller than the bag, but also bigger than the vinyl window. I round the edges so it's easier to pin and sew the double fold bias tape to finish it. I forgot to turn on the camera while sewing the bias tape on, so here's just what it looks like. I insert the pinboard and finally it's complete! I really love how the bag turned out, and I'm thinking about making a pattern for it so I don't have to think so hard in the future. Would anyone be interested if I made an Ita tote bag pattern? If there's one improvement I would make if I did this bag again, I would want the sides of the bag where the plaid fabric is to be padded as well. There were more gifts I gave out for Christmas, of course, but these were all the DIYs I did. If you liked this video, leave me a comment to tell me what you thought, and subscribe if you want to see more. My next video I'll be posting is an alt fashion lookbook. Hope to see you in the next one.